Welcome everybody. The session now is 243 and it's updates from the MTC and the MEN2 Registry.
Thank you so much, Bill. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jessica Foft, and I am a clinical research coordinator at the University of California, San Francisco. I'm here on behalf of the Medullary Thyroid Cancer and MEN2 Registry, and we're so pleased to be here presenting this panel for you. Thank you so much again for joining us. I'll go ahead and let Ruth Amaku introduce herself as well.
Awesome. So hi everyone, my name is Ruth Amaku and I am a member of the MD Anderson research team, and we work on the MTC and MEN2 registry. And so I'm really pleased to be here with you all just to give some updates about what we're doing with the registry. And then I will hand it off to Dr. Sosa.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of our multi-institutional medullary thyroid cancer team from MD Anderson Cancer Center and UCSF, thank you to ThyCa for the privilege of participating in the conference today. I'm sorry that we cannot be in person. This is usually one of my favorite days and favorite events of the year to catch up with so many patients, families, and friends of patients with medullary thyroid cancer. So I'm Dr Sosa. I'm an endocrine surgeon and surgical oncologist at UCSF, where I'm also the chair of the Department of Surgery. And I am a researcher and surgeon scientist who sort of basically committed my life to studying thyroid cancer with a particular interest in medullary thyroid cancer. And we're all very excited to share with you our work around our MTC registry. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Jessica to lead the presentation off. We look forward to great conversation. Please send questions our way. Thanks.
So we wanted to start by acknowledging this amazing multidisciplinary team that we've gathered to work on this project. It takes lots and lots of people in lots of different locations coming together to learn more about MTC and MEN2. So as you can see here, some faces that may be familiar, some faces that may not be, including endocrine surgeons, endocrinologists, pediatric endocrinologists, and some social scientists that have all come together to help us work on this registry, to develop it, to continue to improve it. So this is our whole team of smiling faces here in front of you working on the registry. Next slide.
If I can have just observe something actually, which I hadn't noticed before, is this an all women team? Wow.
It looks like it. It looks
So I hadn't noticed that before, but it is really striking to look at the diversity and uniformly spectacular team of investigators. And it does appear to be all female, so that's pretty cool.
And these are pictures of our beautiful two campuses. So we're across the country from each other, but we work collaboratively on this. So here's two of the places that you may or may not have been to, but this is where we work when we're actually in our offices. And the next thing, we have created a poll for the audience, just a few quick questions. We actually have 3 questions for you to complete. And we were hoping to learn a little bit more about who's attending our presentation, what your interests are, what brought you here, so that we can talk together and learn about who everyone is who is in the group, since we can't look out and see everyone's faces like we could in olden times. So what we have is a poll. It's going to be 3 questions for you to take. It'll pop up on your screen. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and have Ambria, who's our lovely producer, go ahead and pop that poll up. And we'll give you about 3 minutes to answer the questions. It shouldn't take that long, but go ahead and, Ambria, go ahead and put the poll up, please.
Yep, it looks like we have about 36 responses at 41, so we're doing great.
Great, thank you, because we don't see it on our end. So. Looks like we have about 48 people in the room right now, so that's really exciting for us to know that so many people are out there. Just kind of let us know what brought you to this panel discussion. Let us know if you had heard about the registry prior to this. and let us know where you get your information about MTC and MEN2, sort of the sources that you look to for information. Okay, and I should say we'll present the results in a little bit. This is the plan.
All right, so I think it's my turn to present. And so the purpose of the registry that we're discussing today is to really try to take a very rare disease like medullary thyroid cancer and to assemble enough experience with this rare disease to inform management of the disease. And this is a problem for many rare diseases. We call them orphan diseases because no one is so interested at the federal level because there are not so many patients. And so investing money is harder to justify, at least from their perspective. But of course, for those of us who care for patients with rare diseases like medullary thyroid cancer, and even more importantly, for patients who have rare diseases, this is an unfortunate problem. And so the purpose of our registry was to assemble two of the largest thyroidology and thyroid surgery centers in the world, MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston and the University of California, San Francisco at UCSF, to assemble two large teams and our patients to try to understand how to optimize management. And management extends all the way from how best to diagnose the disease, how best to stage the disease, how best to treat patients surgically, how best to surveil patients. And in particular, our interests are focused on those patients who unfortunately have locally advanced and metastatic disease, where there is so much energy with small molecule therapies to try to understand how to optimize care. And if you can't assemble enough patients, if you just publish your own experience with the disease at a single provider or institution level, there's just not enough bandwidth to understand things. And the purpose also, I think, of the registry is not just to provide evidence around what surgeons and endocrinologists and oncologists should be doing, but also because there's so much what we call evidential equipoise, meaning it's an indolent disease, it's a disease that extends over years or decades. And as a result, the data has trouble separating this from that, better from worse. And so when it's unclear what the best strategy is, it's very important to understand the patient perspective. Because so frequently in 2021, about to be 2022, the patients and their preferences, their values, and their attitudes are at the epicenter of decision-making. And so another purpose of this registry is to understand patients' perspectives and what their values are around decision-making when the evidence does not help us to navigate clearly the better path forward. So next slide, Ruth. So this has been a labor of love. There is no other way to describe this. It has taken a very long time to get to where we are today, which I think is really just a testament to the true commitment that the team you're hearing about today have for all of you. And when we started, no one was funding us, no one was supporting us. We did this sort of on a shoelace. But since 2012, so now nearly a decade later, now fortunately many have begun to understand the value and the importance of this registry, such that we now have industry support from the registry, from both Exelixis and now Eli Lilly. We have professional association support, the International Thyroid Oncology Group. For full disclosure, I'm the chair of the Finance and Audit Committee of ITOG, and I'm one of the board of directors. ITOG has now invested in the registry to expand the registry outside of MD Anderson and UCSF, and it now will be including the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, as well as the University of Colorado at their Anschutz campus just outside of Denver. And then lastly, we have support from, perhaps most importantly, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And why FDA support is so important is that, as you all know, the FDA is at that nexus of reviewing evidence and deciding what drugs, novel drugs, to approve or not approve, particularly in this setting of locally advanced and metastatic disease. And the Food and Drug Administration is supporting us across many years. We have continued to try to expand this registry, and in California, for those of you who live in California, we now have recruitment sites that are opening at the University of California, Davis, so outside of Sacramento, and the University of California, Fresno campus in the Central Valley. It's also important for all of you to know that you don't have to be treated at one of these sites to be able to enroll in the registry. You can do that virtually, and Jessica and Ruth will be helping to navigate what that path could look like if you are interested in sharing your life experience with the registry. Why? In order to try to inform better care for patients like yourself. So this is the timeline. This is the hard work that has been done. And you could say, well, Dr. Sosa, are you optimistic, pessimistic? And for those of you who know me, and I think some of you do, I'm like the eternal optimist, but I think we are getting stronger and bigger every day. And our hope ultimately, I think, is to become an international registry that will be able to enroll patients from all around the world in order to understand really well what the patient experience is, regardless of what you call home. Next slide. So what are the components of this registry? So it's kind of complicated, but we've simplified it for you. So there is a governing body called the steering committee for this registry. And it's a really cool steering committee. You know all the people who are on it. They're all the big thought leaders from thyroidology, oncology, and surgery on the provider side. It has some of the best scientists in the world around the study of medullary thyroid cancer. It has representatives, non-voting, from industry, and it has patients. And I think in many ways, it is the patient advocate, and the patient perspective that is most valuable for this registry. Now, as part of the registry, we assemble information about our patients as they move through their disease course. And what are the data we collect? So we don't centralize it. We keep data around medullary thyroid tumor tissue and blood. We keep that at each of your respective institutions, but we can access that in order to assemble data across sites. For those of you who have inherited forms of the disease, we collect information about your family and your family's experience with the disease. We ask you to provide information on questionnaires about the experiences, objective and subjective, that you're having. From the electronic medical record, we collect information about demographics, your clinical course, and pathology. And then finally, as you move through the disease, we get your perspective on outcomes. And those are called patient-reported outcomes. And I think many of us think these have for too long been neglected in clinical trials. Next slide. So that's the simplified version. Okay, here's the complicated version, and we don't have to walk through it, but I hope all of you can just scan these data that these are all individual data points that we are collecting again and again and again, because they're all really kinetic, right? They change over time. And so I think the problem with a lot of research is it's static, right? You get one point of time, which is only relevant to that point in time, right? But all of us are changing all the time. And so this is a kinetic registry that continues to accumulate data as time goes on. So we collect information about demographics, your treatment and how you do from your treatment, results around genetic testing, which is essential for any patient newly diagnosed with medullary thyroid carcinoma. We collect biospecimen, that's the blood and tissue repository. For those of you with inherited forms of the disease, we want to know about your family history, because even patients who have the same mutation, different pedigrees and different families have different experiences with those mutations. We get information about your imaging and your laboratory values. We have extensive patient questionnaires. I wouldn't call them owners. In fact, they flow very, very quickly. And then last and perhaps not least, but most important, your patient recorded outcomes, which are things like quality of life, symptoms, your physical activity, the cost implications of your care and the impact of your care on everyday life, how you cope and how you make decisions when it's unclear what the best thing to do is, and about your nutrition. And I think for too long as physicians, we haven't thought about the importance of nutrition, about how that impacts how you do. So these are just some of the things we collect, and it's super cool. Next, Ruth. So, you know, a lot of people are like, this is like super high level. Like, I don't understand, like, give me an example of why this information is important, or maybe how you, Dr. Sosa, or my medullary thyroid cancer physician could find this registry useful. So this is kind of coy, but it's MTC, a tale of two types, like a tale of two cities. But as I think all of you know, there are at a very high level, two forms of medullary thyroid cancer: sporadic medullary thyroid cancer, which represents the majority of medullary thyroid cancer that is identified in the United States, and then a minority of patients, about 25% at a population level, have hereditary forms of the disease. And I hope everyone knows, if you have a hereditary form of the disease, these are germline mutations of the RET proto-oncogene. And when we look at these thyroids under the microscope, if you have an inherited form of the disease, you often will have multifocal disease, so multiple sites of thyroid cancer in the thyroid, and you have a background like stars in the night sky of C-cell hyperplasia. Sporadic medullary thyroid cancer, we don't find this germline RET mutation, although often there are somatic RET and RAS mutations. These patients, unlike hereditary forms of the disease, usually only have one site of medullary thyroid cancer in their gland, and there is no background of C-cell hyperplasia. So both medullary thyroid cancers, but behaving and presenting very differently. Next slide. So what's the point? Complicated, right? It's a complicated landscape. So I'm going to give you two patient cases about how Dr. Grubbs, who is my co-principal investigator, and I have, even though we know a ton about medullary thyroid cancer, I got to be honest with you, we know so much more. We're wiser because of the registry. So this was a real patient, not hypothetical, 43-year-old woman who presented to MD Anderson Cancer Center, diagnosed with medullary thyroid cancer. She had no family history of MTC. She underwent guideline recommendations, American Thyroid Association guideline recommendations, which say if you present with medullary thyroid cancer, whether you have a family history or not, you should undergo genetic testing. So she did, and she was found to have a very rare thing. Many experts in medullary thyroid cancer, frankly, have never heard of or seen a RET K666, kind of an ominous name, K666N mutation. Next slide. So what does that mean? Next slide, Ruth. Okay, so this, at the time of her presentation, if you comb the literature, and we did, there were two cases in all of the medical literature describing this K666N mutation, which in these two patients, I don't know how much you can gain from two unique patients, had an indolent form of medullary thyroid cancer. Now, when you looked at these two case studies, there were no family studies that had been done. So we were left wondering about the significance of this finding for these patients' families. And so even though we had these two case examples, we were left from reviewing the literature going, we really don't know enough to inform what recommendations to make for the patient who is sitting in the Anderson Clinic. Next slide. So we went to our registry, and at this point we folded in, at that point I was at Duke University, and we actually took a look at patients at Anderson and at Duke University, and look what we found in our medullary thyroid cancer registry. When we dug in, we actually were able to unmask 8 separate families who demonstrated this K666N mutation. If you can animate this, Ruth. And across those 8 families, there were 24 separate individuals who had this K666N mutation. And we hadn't really looked at the registry to answer this question, but what you immediately see is that for this patient, the information we gleaned from the registry completely overwhelmed what was known in the literature. And as you probably could guess, we wrote this experience up in order to share our learning and share our knowledge with colleagues around the world. Next slide, please. So before the registry, what do we do for this young woman in our clinic? And after the registry, we knew what to do, and we were able to advise her and her family around best strategies. Next slide, please. All right, let's change it up. This is a second real patient, again at MD Anderson Cancer Center, 50-year-old man. Father was diagnosed with MTC, age 75, has the RET609 mutation, also has a germline RET609 mutation, but our patient, as opposed to his father, our patient underwent screening, and based on serum calcitonin levels and ultrasound, he had no evidence of medullary thyroid cancer. Next slide. So the question that this 50-year-old patient said was, I'm 50, my dad was 75 when he had the mutation identified. Do I really need to have my thyroid removed when you have been unable to demonstrate any benefit to me from that? And obviously thyroid surgery comes with risk. Next slide. So you know what we did? We dug into the registry around the 609 mutation. And here in this slide, I'll just focus you a little bit. The 609 mutation is seen in dark red. It's a scarlet red. Maybe you can point to it there, Ruth, in the middle. Yep. And this shows the incidence of medullary thyroid cancer in patients with the 609 mutation as it relates to their life course. And on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, you see age of the patient extending from age 0 to over 85 years. And you not only see it for the 609 mutation, but using our registry, we said, let's not look at things in isolation. Let's compare the 609 mutation to several other mutations which from the literature are suggested to behave in similar ways. Next slide, please. So we took our patient in question. He's 50. So you can see on the x-axis, the 50 years of age, and we go up and over to see, in fact, what the likelihood is of him having medullary thyroid cancer, but are not being able to demonstrate or prove this. And you see it is over 50%. Okay, so at age 50 years for the 609 mutation, you have at least a 50% risk of already having medullary thyroid cancer. And as you know, one of our purposes in doing surgery for medullary thyroid cancer is, of course, we want to treat the disease, but really what we would want to do is to prevent the disease altogether by anticipating it before it happens. So next slide. So before the registry, when this patient presented, we were like, we don't really have any data. And he said, I don't want my thyroid out. We were like, but maybe we do want to take it out. And after the registry, over half of people with your mutation, this is the conversation we had, who presented the way you did actually already have medullary thyroid cancer. This has been the trend and likely will be the trend. And so our recommendation was to have his thyroid removed, but now we were able to provide evidence to support that recommendation. And the patient, who was super reasonable, said, now you have convinced me that the risk is justified by the benefit. And so we were able to perform thyroidectomy. He did very well. And I think we assuredly have improved his life course. Next slide. And I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks, Dr. Sosa, for those interesting case presentations. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is switch gears a bit and give some updated information that's coming from the registry. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss was our enrollment. So the FDA study that Dr. Sosa previously mentioned, since we started that in 2019, we've enrolled around 350 participants, which is huge, right? Because as we all know, COVID was a big impact and it impacted research as well. But I think it speaks to two things. One, the work of our research team just to further the research and make sure we're enrolling patients, but two, the willingness of participants to be a part of our research, right? It makes a huge difference when families and individuals are really eager to give back in this way. So that's one of the things I want to highlight. And then I also want to highlight the total number of participants we have in the registry at this time. So that's around 1,600 in total. And then as far as the sporadic goes, around 1,000. Then for hereditary patients, there's around 600. And the reason why I think, some patients will understand that hereditary patients are a little bit more rare in a sense, but because of our capability to enroll family members through the registry, I think that's why you see this larger number. And then the next thing that I wanted to showcase was, if you look at the bottom, you'll see that not all of our patients come from just Texas or California. This is really something that is throughout the US. So we're enrolling patients from totally different states outside of Texas and California, where, University of California and then also MD Anderson are located. But it's not just in the US, but we also enroll patients from all over the world. And so because of the partnerships that we have ongoing with organizations that are very interested in supporting patients who have been diagnosed with endocrine neoplasia and MTC, like MEN Support, ThyCa, the MEN Group, and then ITOG, we've seen this difference in not just enrolling at the United States, but in Canada, Europe, Africa, Saudi Arabia. So, okay. I see somebody mentioned they enrolled in the registry last year and they're from Kentucky, and so they weren't on the graph. Don't worry, for next year, we'll definitely include you. And I think I remember her, so thanks for joining. Okay, so the next question that some patients might have are, how do we identify the patients that we enroll in the registry? Well, the first and primary way that we enroll is through screening medical records. So at MD Anderson and University of California, San Francisco, we look through our registry and we look through the medical records and we look to see patients who fit the criteria, whether that means they have MTC or MEN2. Those are patients that we will reach out to and talk to about the registry. The next thing that we have found is really common is that patients will get wind about our study, whether by word of mouth or family members, and they'll reach out to us by way of the study email. And so what we usually do is we connect with patients in that way, and we give them a call and talk to them about the study, and usually they're open to enrolling. As I mentioned earlier, we're able to enroll patients and their family members. And so we have the capability within the registry to provide contact information for family members. And so what you can do is give us their name and their number as well as their email. And what we would do is reach out to them, tell them more about the research. And if they're interested in enrolling, they can do so. Also, by way of physicians, the word of mouth, and then patient conferences just like this, we're able to enroll more and more patients. Alrighty, now the question you might now ask is, what would I have to do if I was a part of the registry? Great question. Well, I just want to let you know that this is something that is pretty remote, and so you wouldn't have to worry about driving all the way to MD Anderson or flying all the way to the University of California, San Francisco, just to be a part of this study. What we would ask you to do first and foremost is we'd like to request access to your medical records for research-related purposes. And the reason why we're doing that is because it's allowing us to collect information from those variables that Dr. Sosa mentioned earlier, right? Those related to genetics, those related to environment, treatment history. And so it's a pretty simple process for us to go through. The next thing that is more of homework on your end, but as Dr. Sosa mentioned, those questionnaires and surveys that we would send out to you. So those patient-reported outcomes. And really what we're doing with that is it's allowing us to get a more holistic picture of MTC and MEN2 in combination with what we find from the medical records. So this is really your time to let us know information from your symptoms all the way to nutrition and how they might have played a role in your care. The other thing that we do is that we like to remain in contact with the members that we have on the registry by way of a yearly recontact form. So we like to do that because sometimes you might have been seen at another institution or a hospital during the year. And so we like to make sure that we're getting updated information as much as possible. And another way we do that is by sending follow-up questionnaires. And these follow-up questionnaires are fairly similar to what we send initially, but it's just seeing how things might have changed as it relates to your symptoms, nutrition, and different things like that. Another way that we like to get information from the registry is from biospecimens. So tissue and saliva and blood are really things that we can get information from as well to help inform what we're doing in the registry. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, is we'd like to contact family members as well who might be eligible and enroll them in that way. Alrighty. So the next thing that I wanted to discuss, let me go back down, is one of the new studies that we have through the registry. And so we're able to get a prestigious grant from the U.S. Food and Drug Association, as Dr. Sosa mentioned, and really this is a natural history grant. And what a natural history study does, it's looking at patients who have a disease or are at risk of developing disease and following them over time just to see different things as it relates to development and outcome of a certain disease. And so with this study, we have a couple of goals, right? And so I'm going to break them up and give you a very high level overview of the goals of the study. So the first thing that we're looking at is to really understand the natural history of MTC. And this study is specifically for those who are adults who have been diagnosed with MTC. And we're using information from the registry in combination with information from questionnaires that we send out in order to understand MTC in greater detail. So the questionnaire that we send out is going to be at different frequencies depending on the patient, right? So if you take a look to the left side, you'll see this graph. And so what we're doing is that we would send questionnaires out between 2 to 4 times per year. Now, let's say that you have more stable disease or more slow-growing disease. We would send the question out 2 times per year, but if you might have more advanced or progressive disease, you'd be receiving questionnaires around 4 times per year. And the reason why we're doing that is because we'd like to send questionnaires closer to how often you're seeing your provider, right? So if you have more stable disease, you might be going annually or biannually. And if you have more progressive disease, then you're probably seeing your provider a bit more frequently. And then I'm going to go ahead and point to AIM 3. So AIM 3 is a little bit different in that we're just looking at patients who have been diagnosed with more progressive MTC that requires drug therapy or interventions. And so we're trying to see if more frequent monitoring will help us inform clinical trials in the future and help inform treatment as well in the future. And so you might be wondering, how exactly do we stay close to patients and make sure that we're following them closely? Well, in the 21st century, none other than technology will help us do that. So what we're doing with this study is that we are providing patients with a Bluetooth-enabled blood pressure device, and we're also asking them to download an application that allows them to record their symptoms. And we ask them to record their symptoms and then also take blood pressure readings daily for up to 12 weeks. And so some people, when they hear this, are like, that's a lot to do. But we have found an overwhelming response of the simplicity of this study, the convenience, and the ease of using some of these devices. And so just want to point your direction to the right side where it says, out of 17 patients that we've had enroll on this, 100% would recommend the use of this Bluetooth-enabled device and also the app for other MTC patients during their journey. All right. And then I did want to point your attention quickly before we get into the questions about one of the studies that we just brought out with the MTC registry. And so, as Dr. Sosa mentioned, this is a rare disease. And one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure we're getting the patient's perspective to understand how we can better inform decision-making and help them with making decisions as it relates to MTC. And so what we did was we looked at what was already out there, right? So are there any MTC decision aid tools out there? We found that there were not. But we did want to see other tools that might be out there to help inform the creation of this decision aid tool. We also reached out to members of our stakeholder advisory committee. And so these members included patients, providers, advanced practice providers that really walked alongside us during the research journey. And so they helped inform some of the methods, they helped inform data interpretation, and really helped us with the creation of the tool. And lastly, we conducted a needs assessment, right? So with patients, family members, and providers, in order to understand their experiences with MTC and also get recommendations about what we could do to make this tool, right? How we could make it more really informative for people, and then also what might be best for patients as well. And so I'm going to go through a couple of the things that we found. So we surveyed 54 patients and their family members, and here were the top results. So as far as recommendations for a patient decision aid, the first thing that was around 80% of patients and family members said this would be very helpful is they wanted something that would explain each treatment option in plain language. All right, for the next one, around 67% said they wanted a step-by-step guide to walk them through what they could consider when making a decision. Next, around 59% wanted to see example questions they could ask their physicians. 56 said they'd like charts comparing treatment options side by side. And then around 50% said they want a glossary, stories or like testimonials from families or patients about treatment options, as well as a printable summary. And I got a couple of things when I was looking at these results. One is that patients want to make sure that they're getting information in a clear and simple way to understand. Two, patients really want to get tangible things to take away from their use of the decision aid tool. And then three, patients and family members really want to be able to walk alongside physicians and also the members of the clinical team in the decision-making process. All right. And then as far as the specific ways that, or things that we can incorporate within the tool, so this was a needs assessment that also included providers as well. So we had 10 providers. As far as the first option, so one-page comparison chart of the treatment options that can be used in consultation, something that I kind of mentioned in the previous slide, 9 out of 10 providers said that this would be pretty helpful during the decision-making process. And I know Dr. Sosa, you might be able to speak to this too. But as far as a brochure or video patients can be given towards their appointment, 8 out of 10 providers said that that would be useful. And then the last one that I wanted to point your attention to, this is where we saw patients and family members as well as providers kind of being in agreement around that 70% about the use of a worksheet with preferences and values that can be completed and added to the electronic medical records. So I did want to mention that we have taken the results of this needs assessment, and we are currently in the process of making this tool. So hopefully by 2022, you will be able to see this tool, use this tool, and help it within your decision making. So I'm going to go ahead and take it back to Dr. Sosa to mention one of the studies that we have coming up. So take it away, Dr. Sosa.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And also thank you, Jessica. Like, I'm busy typing, but Jessica's typing faster. So thank you, Jessica, for managing our chat. And we're going to come to some questions that we haven't been able to answer in writing. So one of the cool things about science, I think, is that as you ask questions, you realize you can answer some you can't, but more questions come out as you are doing the science. And so one of the amazing things about this registry is that we started with a set of questions, and we have been able to assemble data not only to answer or start to answer those questions, but to start to ask new questions. And one of our interests that has grown out of this registry, which initially was largely focused on adults, is interest in children with medullary thyroid cancer. And obviously children with medullary thyroid cancer almost exclusively are children with RET mutations. And so as a surgeon, I think one of the questions I've had for a very long time, and other surgeons have as well as our pediatric endocrinology colleagues, is what is the optimal time to perform surgery? And I think for those of you who have inherited forms of the disease, I suspect you think about these kinds of questions a lot. And the question comes down to, you want to do the surgery as early as you can, do it safely, knowing that thyroid surgery in children and babies is fraught with risk, much higher risk than are seen in adult patients. So that would lead you to say, well, let's delay surgery. But of course, you cannot indefinitely delay surgery, because then you run the risk of not doing a preventative operation, but rather doing an operation that is just a little too late after the child has developed medullary thyroid cancer. So it no longer is preventative or potentially curative, but rather it is intended to be a form of treatment. So as surgeons working together with our pediatric endocrinology colleagues, we've been thinking for decades about weighing benefit with risk. But of course, who is at the nexus of this evidence? And of course, it is the children themselves, but also their parents. And we have seen anecdotally over the years that different patients and different families faced with different mutational risk make different decisions around this risk-benefit ratio. And so we are planning to embark on a study focused on parents and children in the setting of inherited medullary thyroid cancer. And the kinds of questions we're asking, and you can see it on this slide, is what information would you find, you as the parent, you as a child or adolescent, what would you find most helpful to guide your decision from your perspective? What are your biggest priorities and concerns? Is it the risk of a nerve injury in the child? Is it the risk of hypoparathyroidism and low calcium levels in the child? Or is it the risk of persistent disease, recurrent disease, or having the disease? So our pediatric endocrinologists, our surgeons at UCSF and MD Anderson Cancer Center are embarking on a discrete choice experiment focused on patients who are part of our registry. And as a first step, we have already started to make a list of the kind of evidence we think patients and their parents would need. We've started to assemble the numbers, the risks, and the benefits, but then we want to see what resonates with patients and parents. And so we're looking for volunteers to join a focus group discussion, an initial discussion. And to be a volunteer, we would just ask that you have familiarity with medullary thyroid cancer and the various mutations. And we've provided here an email that you can reach out to. And maybe Jessica, you can put that in the chat so that it won't disappear when the slide moves, to offer your volunteerism. Right now, there'll be a little bit of a delay. We're right now getting institutional review board approval to actually have the conversation. But since ThyCa is this weekend, we just want to see who may or may not want to participate. And I would just say thank you in advance for your interest. Ruth or Jessica, thank you.
Oh, this is very exciting. So it looks like I can see here we have 55 people in the room with us. That's really exciting to us. We know that medullary thyroid cancer patients and family members are rare, so this is actually a really powerful group of people that we have here together. So this is really exciting. It looks like about 83% of the people here are MTC patients or survivors, so 35 of us. We have 6 MEN2 patients in the room, 5 caregivers or support people. 9 of you, or 21%, are enrolled in the registry. Possibly after today, we might be able to get that number up a little higher if anyone's interested in enrolling. It looks like 4 of you are interested in participating. That's fantastic to hear for us. So I'll put my email information in the chat. We'll be in a virtual booth following this. You're welcome to stop into the booth and talk to me a little bit more, or email me, and I'll get back to you next week. We can set up a time to talk a little bit more in depth then. And it looks like 11 of you wanted to learn more about the registry. So hopefully you have. Let's see, and then the next, the next one here. It looks like about 64% of you, or 27 of us, had already heard of the registry. So that's fantastic. That sounds like we had gotten the word out up until now, but it looks like 12 of you had not heard about the registry. So I hope that this has been some new information that's been helpful and informative and interesting, and a good way for you to spend your time with us today. And those of you who weren't sure, well, now you know. We can definitely put you in the yes category. So welcome, and I'm glad that you've gotten to join us today. And the last question, we were really interested to see how people are getting their information about MTC and MEN2. And it looks like a number of you obviously are getting your information from ThyCa, 76% of you, which is great. ThyCa has some fantastic resources, and we refer patients all of the time to the MTC resources and the ThyCa website. A good portion of you, 74%, are in the Facebook group, which I know is very active. So that's fantastic support network for you all. 67% of you can go to your doctor for more information. 7% of you reach out to the National Institutes of Health. And it looks like about 19% of you had some other sources. So that's kind of where everyone's getting their information. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much again. So let's see, we have some questions. Let's see, hopefully I've done a good job of triaging these. We did answer some in the text that I felt were sort of more specific to one person. But there was a question in here for Dr. Sosa, and that was the question about for sporadic patients, why, if there are more instances of sporadic MTC, why do we not see more promising drug therapies for those patients? And I know you answered in text, Dr. Sosa, but I was hoping you could kind of talk that out loud, because I bet more people would like to hear that answer.
Well, first of all, this is an incredibly dynamic area. And I totally get, for those of you, because I share this emotion of frustration and why can't we go faster and why can't there be more options? And my observation would be, I'm not that old. I know I may look old, but I'm not that old. And when I began my career, there were no drug options for medullary thyroid cancer, regardless of the mutational status of the patient, literally no options. And then when I was a more junior, the first drug, vandetanib, Vandy, came online, and I actually was privileged and blessed to participate in science led by Sam Wells, another endocrine surgeon, that really brought that drug to market. And it was a first of kind. And we thought, oh my God, how fortunate are we? And then came Cabo. And now I know in this conference, I'm not able to go to all the talks, but it's just accelerating the number of drugs that are in the pipeline and emerging from the pipeline onto the marketplace. And probably the splash this year is perhaps the best drug of them all, selpercatinib, right? Which was a lead article cover story in the New England Journal of Medicine. And as a member of the International Thyroid Oncology Group, which is really an organization that has participants who are the leaders of these clinical trials today, as well as the American Thyroid Association, I think there's more and more hope on the horizon. Is it fast enough? Almost certainly not, particularly for those patients who already have this disease. But I would say I've never seen this energy. What I am committed to, and what I think all of us must be committed to, is supporting things like this registry. This registry will help us to understand what are the better drugs. When is the right time to start treatment? That's a soft call right now. When to start small molecule therapy, when to stop a drug, when to change drug, in what order to give drugs, right? There are no good data to inform these decisions right now. And I think many of us are looking to the registry to answer those questions. So that's the connection between this registry and clinical trials and small molecule drugs for advanced thyroid cancer.
Thank you, Dr. Sosa. Okay, I think so. We're at about 5 till, Dr. Sosa. I believe that you've got to pop off. I don't want to make you late. But I do have another question for Ruth, which is a really great question coming from Bill. What can we do as MTC patients and registrants to assist further with the work of the registry? And how can we easily connect new MTC patients in our group with the registry?
Thank you for that question. I think one of the things that I mentioned earlier was just the recruitment and word of mouth. And so it really plays a huge role if you're a part of the registry and then you kind of explain to other people about, you know, your experiences answering the questions, answering the surveys, the ease of that, right? And so word of mouth is one thing, but we do also have recruitment flyers that can be shared in these groups. So if you do visit our booth, you can get a copy of these flyers. We also do have a copy of the MTC Registry newsletter. And the newsletter is a great way for us to provide continued updates for what's going on in the registry. So you can read about some of the things we discussed today, as well as get some fun facts about the registry. And I think sharing these documents will really help with just increasing our enrollment numbers. And so I hope that answered your question.
Okay. Thanks, Ruth. That's perfect. Let's see, just a couple more questions about the registry. One is about who should we connect and refer to the registry. We enroll patients who have MTC or who have been diagnosed with MEN2. So if you have family members who do not have MEN2, who do not have MTC, at this time, we're not enrolling them in the registry. The question was, if we're sporadic, should we still connect family members? And that answer is no. But if you do have a family history, we would be thrilled if you could put in a good word. We do get a number of referrals, and it always makes us happy that someone participating in the registry feels like it's a worthwhile enough to kind of talk to their family members about it. So we do appreciate that. And then there was one other question I have. Bye, Dr. Sosa. Thank you.
Bye. I said bye in chat. I'm going to see y'all in Los Angeles. Bye.
Let's see. And then just the one last question I can see here was a very specific one, but if you're already enrolled in the registry and have any questions for us, this specific person had said they weren't getting the surveys. I put my contact information here in the chat. It's the MTC registry at ucsf.edu. And you can, if you're in the registry, you can send us any questions. I mean, I might not know the answer right off, but I can definitely find out for you. If you're not getting the surveys, that's something we should troubleshoot on our end. We'll look into it. If you could shoot me an email and let me know your name, we can definitely look into that. I'd be more than happy to figure that out. Any other questions that folks might have. I'm going to hop into the virtual booth. We have an MTC and MEN2 Registry booth. So I'm going to hang out there for a while. I'll be happy to answer any questions, kind of chat with folks. Again, like I can tell you anything about the registry. If it's not totally related to the registry, I might have some resources for you. I'm more than happy to tell you what I know and kind of give you whatever information I possibly can.
Thanks, Jessica. And I went ahead and put our email, our study email at MD Anderson. So it's a bit different from what you see on the slide, but the accurate one is in the chat. Like Jessica mentioned, they will be in the booth providing access to a lot of these documents that we have, as you can see on this slide. So the new paper that we brought out, the MTC Decision Aid paper, that's going to be available to you, the newsletter, recruitment flyers, and it's just going to be a way for you to ask questions as well. So we hope to see you guys there. Thank you guys so much.